So this site is the site called Gummingurru. In pre-contact times, Aboriginal people would come up here from southeast Queensland and northeast New South Wales, and their young boys would be brought here to be initiated into manhood. And then from here they'd travel up to the Bunya Mountains, where they'd participate in the Bunya feasts, which would occur about once every 3 years when the bunya nuts were in their abundance. And the reason that the boys would be initiated is so that they could participate in the adult activities on the Bunya Mountains. And what would happen here at Gummingurru, the boys would be taken down to the carpet snake, which is down here, and they'd be swallowed by the carpet snake and thereby die to childhood, and they'd be born again out of the carpet snake into the initiation ring. And it was at this stage that they would be assigned their Yuri, or their major Yuri, or their totem, and they would be taught the lore of that Yuri and the way in which they should manage that Yuri. One of the Yuris they would be given is the turtle, which you can see here. And all these Yuris are stone arrangements on this site, and the turtle is just one example of the stone arrangements of the Yuris. And we think that it was mostly the coastal boys who would be given the Yuri of the turtle, and this is on the eastern side of the Gummingurru site. On the western side there's the emu, and over here is the bunya nut. So the site is a geographical map of the landscape through which the boys travel. Many of these Yuris come with their own stories, and the turtle story is one of the few stories that we know about. And the turtle that begins its journey at the waterhole down here emerges from the waterhole and makes its way up the hill to this point. So its spirit being emerges from the waterhole and it leaves its footprints on the hillside as it's coming up, and there's 7 little patches of stone which are the wet footprints of the turtle emerging out of the waterhole. And then it places itself here. Its corporeal form is placed here, and this is what we see as this stone arrangement.
Can you tell us a little bit about why it's placed here, or what the significance is of the turtle for the initiates or for the clan itself?
Well, as far as we know, because people were moved away from here in the 1890s, a lot of the specific knowledge has gone. But from the knowledge we've been able to resurrect by talking to old people, or from having information from people who were around in the 1890s passed down, what we think is that each of these Yuris have been placed in this landscape for the young initians, now the students, to learn the story of their Yuri and learn the lore for their Yuri. So the turtle is on the eastern part of this site. So we think that it was people from the east who would have been given this Yuri. The emu is on the western part of the site. So we think that this is a Yuri for young people from the western part of southeast Queensland who would come to this area. And then we've got the bunya nut, which is over here in the north, because the Bunya Mountains are in the north, and these are people who then would be responsible for the management of the bunya nut. So Yuri knowledge is based on management. So this is how young people are learning to manage their ecosystem. And every young person is assigned a Yuri. Many are born into the carpet snake Yuri, which is why the carpet snake is such an important figure on this site. It's the biggest stone arrangement on the site. It's right next to the initiation ring. So many would have been born into the carpet snake Yuri, but through life people are given more and more Yuris, which increases their responsibility for environmental management, increases their knowledge of law. So this site has always been a site of learning and sharing cultural knowledge. And even though today it's no longer used for initiation, it is still being used for sharing cultural knowledge and sharing story through its use today as a reconciliation site for teaching people all around southeast Queensland, girls, boys, adults, children, young, old. Everybody can come here and learn about the cultural heritage of this place. Throughout southeast Queensland, Yuris are a really, really important way of connecting people to their country. So I know, for example, on North Stradbroke Island, people are assigned Yuri at birth. people then choose their own Yuri. So for example, a very young child is taken to an important place on North Stradbroke Island, Brown Lake, at which they're introduced in their physical form to the spirit being of the lake that only knows them in their spirit form. And at that point, if a bird calls or a child shows an interest in a particular plant, that means that that Yuri has chosen that child. And the child then is not only responsible for the management of its Yuri, that places that child in a particular relationship to country and to people, because people are connected through their kin relationships and again through their Yuris. So all carpet snakes, all people who are born as carpet snakes, are linked to their country through their Yuri and to their kinship system through their Yuri. If you're a black snake, you'll have a different kin relationship, you'll have a different responsibility to country. So Yuris are vitally important to connect Aboriginal people to country, and Aboriginal people's connection to country is the core of their identity. The concept of dreaming is a really important concept. The dreaming, sometimes called dream time, but most Aboriginal people now refer to it as the dreaming. People say the dreaming is whenever I've been dreaming. It's from when I first began dreaming, it's now that I'm dreaming, it's into the future when I will be dreaming. It's when my ancestors dreamt. And in that dreaming time, that's when the physical beings of the landscape created the landscape and created the people on the landscape. And so many of these Yuris come from the dreaming. These are dreaming beings. The carpet snake is an important dreaming being. So these are dreaming beings who handed down the law to ancestors, and then this law is passed on through the initiation process, through the learning process, to those Aboriginal people who exist today and into the future. So the Yuri system is really vital for kinship, identity, connection to country, and management of country. This site has been really important. Aboriginal people were removed from this specific area in the 1890s, and as far as we know, the last initiation ceremony here was in about 1891. They were removed from this entire area in the 1960s and only returned quite recently. And they've been actively involved over the last 15 years or so in resurrecting the knowledge of the site by speaking with old knowledgeable people, either knowledgeable Aboriginal people, or if they've passed on, some Europeans who've been given that knowledge as the custodians of that knowledge. So Ben Gilbert, who was the property owner here, was given knowledge by an old Aboriginal man, John Darlow, also known as Bunda. And Ben Gilbert has passed on a lot of his knowledge. As anthropologists and archaeologists, we've been working with the Aboriginal community to expand on that core of knowledge. We've used archaeological techniques to map the site and to excavate the site. We've used anthropological techniques of asking people questions about their knowledge and their memories, not just of this site, but of many sites in the landscape, to contextualise the site, to give the site meaning beyond its narrow focus of just this particular site. So this is where the archaeology and the anthropology has blended to produce a much more holistic understanding of this place, its immediate landscape and its wider cultural landscape through the idea of the creation of memories, memoryscapes or taskscapes, places where people undertake activities. And many of the activities on this site are now focused on sharing knowledge with the broader community. We've been doing some work, we've got students who've been doing some work on developing up teaching packages that teachers can use as part of the national curriculum, which is currently being reviewed by the Australian government, but we're hoping that the key elements of the Aboriginal component of the culture of that curriculum are going to be retained. Because this curriculum, the Aboriginal component of the curriculum, cross-cuts geography, history, science, English and even some maths. And we've been developing activities for school kids to undertake in the classroom and here on site. So the site today remains a place of learning and sharing of knowledge, just as it was in the pre-contact times. So although the initiation part of the site no longer exists, the other part of the site has been resurrected. It is a place of learning. It is a place of knowledge sharing. It is a place where people from different parts of the world can come together. It's about alliance making. The Gummingurru Aboriginal Corporation is forming alliances with the University of Queensland, with the local Shire Council. They're developing opportunities for raising funds to build the visitors centre, to build some places where school groups can come and stay on site and continue their learning and their experience of Aboriginal culture through being in this place. And we couldn't have done that without two important components: collaboration between the archaeologists and anthropologists in the Aboriginal community, and without bringing the anthropology and the archaeology together. Because without all of those elements, we could just not have told the story of this wonderful site. So this site is no longer used as a place of initiation. There are a number of reasons for this, but the key reason that I've been told by the Jarawa Aboriginal traditional custodians of this place and owners of this country within which the site is situated is that with the removal of people in the 1890s from this place, the knowledge, the powerful knowledge that's required to undertake initiation ceremonies from elders to the young people has been severed. Although knowledge of the site and people's connection to this place continued through the opportunity of people like Bunda to continue to visit the site. Because those knowledgeable elders were no longer able to practice this part of their culture here at this site, the meaning of this site has now changed. And for Jarawa people, their desire is to have this site as a place of reconciliation. And so that is its current use. We also know, both archaeologically and anthropologically, that sites do change their meaning over time. There are many places that are sacred at one time and then they become profane, and then maybe even they become sacred again, or are dangerous at one time and then seem to lose their danger. And so Gummingurru is just one of these sorts of sites that we know that for a while was a sacred place and today is still an extremely special, significant, important place, but is no longer sacred in the same kind of way. So I think one of the keys to understanding this place is that it is part of people's living cultural heritage. People today still live on the site, they still work on the site, they still manage the site, they still tell stories about the site, they still journey through this landscape, they still have various points in the landscape that are important memory places. There's a very large site that's much, much closer to Dalby than it is to here, the site of Wamga, that was a big ceremonial campsite. So it's the campsite, it's a campsite associated with ceremony, but it's a place where people camped. It's 100 kilometres away, but it is linked to this site. It's part of the journey up to the Bunya Mountains. And so this place is still part of people's ongoing connection to country. It's where they still live out their responsibilities and obligations to this place. It's where they bring their own young people to remind them of their obligations into the future for the care of country. And so it's very much about keeping the connections to this place alive. They might be now 21st century presentations of that memory and knowledge. We use a website, and we bring kids here and we have web-based activities for them to do and all sorts of other things for them to do here that are very 21st century focused, but they tell very much a pre-contact story, and that's the way this living heritage in connection to place is able to be retained. Resurrection actually occurs in two forms. The first is that one of the senior people for this site, an elder named Brian Tabane, physically resurrected many of the motifs on the site by prodding the ground with a pitchfork until he found buried rocks, and then he picked the rocks up from the ground and placed them on the surface. And in doing that, buried motifs such as the catfish, which is just over here, again on the eastern side of the site, so probably a Yuri for those in the east. The catfish, which was originally a patch of ground like this, has been resurrected from the ground. But the other thing that's been happening is this resurrection of meaning, and this is where the role of the anthropologist and the archaeologist has been so vital, because the knowledge that was held by Jarawa people when we first began working on the site in 2000 was very limited. It was largely limited to the information that had been passed down to them by Bunda and Ben Gilbert, the property owner. But with the help of the archaeologists and the anthropologists, the Jarawa have been able to tap into other memories. So other people in the landscape, such as Mrs. Steinberg in Steinberg Road and Mrs. Frankie in Frankie Road, are families who've lived here for many, many years. And through working with them and asking them questions, we've found out further information about what this place was like right on contact. Working with Aboriginal people from throughout the Jarawa country, we've asked them questions about other sites in the landscape. They've taken us to other places in the landscape. There's a big story place just over the hill here. And so we've been privileged to learn that story and then to see how that story relates back to this place. And so a bit like forensic police, we've been gathering snippets of evidence from all around the area and then seeing how all this evidence comes back together to tell this story. And so we've been resurrecting this meaning bit by bit, piece by piece. The archaeological excavation has also added further information there. It demonstrates that there are parts of motifs that are buried right underneath the motif itself, which suggests that not only are there buried motifs that need to be brought up, but there are portions of motifs that have been covered over in times past and the new rocks added on top of them in exactly the same point. So using all of these different lines of evidence, we've resurrected the story of this place so that in the 1960s nobody knew anything much about this place. To now we have a wealth of knowledge. We have enough knowledge that we could write an entire book on this site about this place and its importance and its meaning and its changing meaning. And that's been through that collaborative work between the Jarawa people and the university researchers. It's been a great privilege to work with the Jarawa people. They've been very welcoming right from the start. So here I am, a white woman, working on an Aboriginal men's site. So when I first heard about this place, I was looking for a place to bring my students to teach them how to do cultural heritage management, how to do a significance assessment. And I was given the contact details for Brian Tabane and Paddy Jerome, who's since passed on. And I contacted Brian and Paddy and asked them if they would be happy for me to work on this site. And they both said yes, they were really keen to develop up their understanding of the place because they wanted to apply to the Indigenous Land Corporation to buy this property. It's freehold property, they can't claim it therefore under native title. The only way they could manage it was through an ILC purchase. But to do that they needed a whole lot of documentation. So we started off with a very symbiotic relationship. We would provide the Jarawa people with the significance assessment they needed and we would have access to a site to train students, which is something I needed. And from that moment, from the first moment of meeting Paddy and Brian, and then over time meeting other members of the Jarawa community, we've developed a wonderful working relationship. They're a very welcoming group to work with. We've got a really good collaborative system so that when one of us has an idea, we run it by the other. So Paddy Jerome is now passed on, Brian Tabane is very ill, so we now work with the next generation, so that's with Conrad and Shannon Bowens in particular. They're the Secretary and Chairman of the Gummingurru Aboriginal Corporation. But we really work together. We know each other's telephone numbers and email addresses, and we regularly are in contact with each other. If we have ideas for student projects, we share them. Sometimes ideas for projects come from me and the students, and we put them to the Gummingurru Aboriginal Corporation. Sometimes the other way around, where the Gummingurru Aboriginal Corporation will contact us and say, this is what we need, have you got students who would like to work on this? So right now I've got 2 students actively working on the site. I have Jaden Thomas, who's a PhD student, and she's been working to take the archaeological dot points that place the rocks and individual points in the landscape, but she's animating all of these points to tell the story, like the turtle story, like the carpet snake swallowing the initian. She's showing how the archaeological material can be brought to life through animation. And this is something that's going to go onto the website, and the Jarawa community are really excited about the work that Jaden's been doing. We also have Hannah Collins, and this is a project that was done the other way around, where Jarawa wanted some material to put into the visitor centre. The website's got material that schools can do in class, but there's not a lot for school groups to do here on site other than to be taken on a walk through the site. So once they've done that in 20 minutes, there's not much to do. So Jarawa wanted some materials to put into the visitor centre, and so Hannah has developed up 5 posters that tell the story of Gummingurru from arrival and initiation through to travelling up to the Bunya Mountains, and incorporates the concepts of living heritage. And with each of these posters there's a set of activities that the school children will do here up in the visitor centre before they're taken out onto the site, so they have a really good understanding of the site before they arrive. And then a final activity which is a game, a kind of an all-in game, where the school children act out their responsibility to their Yuris. And it's a fun game that involves chasing kangaroos, but not killing too many, because the Yuri holders are watching to ensure that there's not over-exploitation. So this ties together a whole lot of information. So this again is a really good example of this collaborative work that we've been doing. So what's that meant for me personally? As somebody who's trained as both an archaeologist as an anthropologist, for somebody who's passionate about cultural heritage, so the way people relate to heritage places of the past but in the present, I've been incredibly privileged. I've worked with a number of Aboriginal groups around, particularly New South Wales and southeast Queensland. Certainly this group has been one of the most welcoming groups that I've worked with. The site is one of the most stunning sites that I've ever worked on. Every time we come here we learn just something different. Even if it's a tiny bit different, there's something different to learn. And it's great that we can share this knowledge in both directions and with the wider community. When I first started working here in 2000, I was already interested in issues relating to living heritage. I was already interested in issues relating to people's connection to place. But I'd never quite got the fact that cultural heritage may be created in the past, but it's given meaning in the present. It really only exists if people in the present are interested in it. Otherwise, it really is just a pile of stones. And although I thought I knew that, it wasn't until I came here and really saw the way that people's memories of landscape linked to this place that I really got that concept. And the other concept that I think this place helped me to fully understand was the concept of place as a verb. You know, we in the West tend to think of a place, site, as a noun. You know, here it is. I can put a dot on a map. But really, places are not nouns. Places are where things happen. It's a taskscape. It's a place where memories are created, so it's a memoryscape. And that's what Ed Casey talked about. Casey wrote this paper way back in 1996 called How to Get from Space to Place in a Fairly Short Period of Time. And it's a great paper about the way in which you can go from a site, a dot on a map, to place that is imbued with a whole pile of memories and connections. So when I first came to Gummingurru, I felt very uncomfortable being here. I knew it was a men's site. I'd brought students to come, and even though Brian and Paddy were really welcoming, I still felt I shouldn't be here. There's something about this place that I felt was just a problem. But I came back to it on numerous occasions, always with, first of all, checking with Brian and Paddy or whoever was acting as the custodian for the site at the time. And over time, my ease with the site evolved. But I think the turning point for me was the first field season that we did here with the archaeologist, doing the plotting of the rocks. And I got a grass seed in my eye, and it caused my eye to bleed, and in fact my eye was so badly infected and swollen and full of blood I had to go to hospital and get the grass seed taken out, and then I got a seed in the other eye. And so I had these two eyes that were bloodshot, and I couldn't see. It kind of was like Saul on the road to Damascus, being blinded and then having a conversion, because it was at the end of that field season, when my eyes were better and I could see again, that sense of connection to place fell into place. And I felt for the first time the spirituality that comes with this place. Now I know that my spiritual connection to this place is infinitesimal compared to the spiritual connection that traditional owners would have to this place. But it does give me that inkling of what it must be like to have that powerful connection to place. And of course the sadness that would come should that connection be broken. So I think one of the things that this site can teach is the importance of understanding intangible heritage and tangible heritage. The turtle is tangible. You can see it, you can touch it. But the story of the turtle is intangible. It's something you have to know and you have to feel. That the place of Yuris in Aboriginal people's society is intangible. And yet the significance of this place lies in the Yuris. You can't understand the significance of this site just by plotting 9,368 rocks. That describes the site. It does not describe the place. So I think the other thing that this place does is it acts as an opportunity to demonstrate that intersection between tangible and intangible heritage. Our legislation is very bad at recognising intangible heritage. It pretends to do so. Section 12 of the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Act here in Queensland talks about the fact that sites do not have to have physical manifestations in order to be protected under the Act. The reality is it does. We've tried to protect places that have no physical evidence and we can't. The Act really doesn't allow for it. So we're not very good at understanding and recognising intangible heritage. This place provides the opportunity to teach students about that intangible nature of heritage and its importance.
Great. Can you, one accusation that's sometimes levelled against anthropology is the unequal power relations that we have in the field, particularly of people going abroad, but also working in the developed world with Indigenous peoples. Is that an issue that you've encountered in your work here perhaps or elsewhere?
Certainly there have been a number of occasions where there's been very obvious disempowerment, and most of that disempowerment in the cultural heritage world comes to the traditional owners. We've had 3 pieces of legislation in this state in 1967, 1987 and the current Act is a 2003 Act. And although the current Act provides Aboriginal people with an opportunity to have a much greater say in the management of their cultural heritage, that's a very recent change. And even then, the bulk of the power rests with those who have the opportunity to challenge a decision in a court and to have enough funding for that. And so I think there is quite a bit of disempowerment still for Indigenous people. There is still disempowerment, I think, on this site. The Indigenous Land Corporation have purchased this property and have handed it back to the Jarawa through the Gummingurru Aboriginal Corporation. But Jarawa have had to form themselves into a Western-style corporation to manage the place. They have to do Western-style business management plans to keep the site. They have to fill in paperwork that you would not believe, pages and pages and pages of detailed economic material, budgeting, maintenance, purchasing, very Western style bureaucratic financial management paperwork. The focus of all the work that Jarawa have to do to keep control and management of this site is Western style business. There's nothing about their maintenance of the cultural heritage that even comes into their ability to retain ownership of this site. I think that's really disempowering. What I think is wonderful about the way we've been able to work on this site is that the anthropologists work really closely with the Gummingurru Aboriginal Corporation, and we help each other in these kinds of activities. So I'm now an associate member of the Gummingurru Aboriginal Corporation. I can't be a member because I'm white and I'm female. And to be a member of the GAC, because this is a men's site, you have to be Aboriginal and you have to be male. But I'm an associate member, and as a consequence I can attend their annual general meetings, I'm able to provide advice, I'm able to help with this dreadful paperwork. And so in a way I guess that empowers us both, because as a Western trained person who spent 10 years as a bureaucrat, I'm quite good at filling in paperwork. As Aboriginal people, they're quite good at explaining to me what they want to say in these documents, and so we're able to work together. I suppose in the long run I do have a more powerful position than even the traditional owners, because if we want funding, it has to go through me. Even when we wanted to purchase the next door block to act as a buffer to development around here, the ILC said, until you get an archaeologist to verify the significance of this place, we won't purchase it. So the say-so of the traditional owners is not enough. So we're still privileging those of us from the West, and that then, I think, empowers us more than it empowers the traditional owners. And that's a shame, because I think the Jarawa have demonstrated that they can take care of this place on their own. They don't actually need any of us to take care of this place, to manage this place, to tell the story of this place. But we're here to help. We're here to work with people. We write the papers, but they're joint publications. We sell the story, but it's through the Gummingurru website that is managed by us, but with Jarawa as the first point of contact for school groups if they want to come here. So we're trying as far as possible to have a very balanced power relationship. And I guess you'd have to ask Conrad whether or not that's worked. Do I see myself as an activist anthropologist when it comes to working on this site? And what I would love to say is absolutely not, because I really philosophically have a problem with activism, because I think as an activist you do then end up disempowering those people who are on the site, because really Aboriginal people should be able to speak for themselves and fight their own battles. The reality is our Western system is designed to make it really, really difficult for Indigenous people to fight their own battles. They can, but often they have to do it by being a kind of overtly activist. People like Murrindoo who try to make the point that Aboriginal people should be able to manage their resources, and the way he does that is he kills 2 crocodiles that are a protected species and ends up in the High Court. I mean, that's genuine activism, but there are not many Aboriginal people who have the wherewithal and the confidence such as Murrindoo has. He's a very confident young man and he's fought a number of these battles. I don't think Jarawa people have that confidence, nor do I think they have the wherewithal to fight these kinds of battles. And so it does come to the relationship that we have with these people to help them with this kind of battle fighting. And if that makes me an activist, then I guess it does. And I say it fits quite uncomfortably for me to do that. Just as an example, I remember we had a meeting here at the Visitors Centre one time when we were looking to get some funding. And most of the people in the room were Aboriginal bureaucrats from various different government departments around southeast Queensland. And Brian Tabane was here and I was here. And the first question that we were asked was about the significance of the site. And Brian said, Annie, you can talk about the significance of the site. So I spoke about the archaeological significance and its significance as a learning place. And then turned to Brian and said, but Brian can talk about the Aboriginal significance. And Brian said, no, you can talk about that. And I said, no, Brian, this is your place. I really think you should talk about it. And he said, We've given you the authority to speak for this site. I am telling you to speak for this site. Now, if looks could kill, I'd be dead, particularly from the Aboriginal women sitting around the table. They thought it was totally inappropriate for me to speak for this site. But Brian was adamant. He did not want to speak. He did not want to speak publicly. He's a very, very shy man. And he sat with his arms folded the whole time, and he was not going to speak. And so I felt quite uncomfortable, but I presented the views about this place that I'd learnt from Brian, that I'd learnt through Brian from Bunda, that I'd learnt from Paddy Jerome, that I'd learnt from the others. I deferred to their knowledge the whole time, but it made me very uncomfortable because it really did then put me very much in that role of activist and advocate. So I suppose if you've worked long enough on a site, if you've worked long enough with people, if you become so connected to the place that you yourself feel incorporated into the spirituality of the place, you do end up in that role of activist and advocate, like at Toowoomba.